Sometimes comments on videos show an interesting bias, a hint at a worldview that the commenter holds about the subject in question. Often people are justifying their objection to an opinion I've expressed, but in their justification there is a flaw, a fault in the logic, which suggests that they haven't entirely thought through the subject in hand. That happens fairly regularly when people talk about the cost of EVs. The price is too high, they say, the depreciation too great, so they will be throwing their money away if they bought one. Well, it's probably about time we retested their theory, updating it based on the latest market conditions. Is the cost of buying and running an EV too great at the moment? When trying to justify why someone wouldn't buy an EV, when all else fails, people talk about money, particularly in relation to depreciation. The upfront cost of an EV is enormous, they say, and depreciation is huge, so you'd be wasting your money to buy one. Really? That doesn't seem to entirely make sense, does it? After all, if there's lots of depreciation, then there should be lots of second-hand bargains to be had, plenty of money off the purchase price. That sounds like an advantage to me. Since we know EVs have lower running costs than petrol or diesel cars, that should make an EV pretty attractive. Why don't we have a look to see which of these views is correct? Can we save money with an EV at the moment? Okay, so we want to find something a few years old, see how much it would cost to buy, and then estimate the running costs as well, giving us the total cost of ownership. I want to do a comparison with a petrol or diesel car, and ideally I want to rule out any differences caused by varying make or model. So let's use a model which offers multiple drivetrains, something like the Kia Niro. Kia offers a petrol hybrid and a good EV, so that seems like a good place to start. In the UK, the largest second-hand car website is Auto Trader, so I popped on there to find some prices. In searching for cars of the same age and mileage, I found these. A 22 plate 1.6 petrol hybrid with 38,000 miles in the level 4 trim. That's a pretty high spec, which will do us nicely. That's listed for £18,795, so that's our start point. We can compare it with this, a 22 plate Niro EV in the 4 Plus trim, just under 38,000 miles on the clock. That's a pretty good match. The petrol hybrid costs nearly £2,800 more than the EV, and that's of interest. But really what matters is not just initial price, but also depreciation. So we need to know what we would sell these for after 3 years or so. So here are 2019 cars of similar specification. First, the petrol hybrid, again a level 4 trim like the 22 plate car we found. It's got just over 60,000 miles on the clock, so that is pretty similar, just older. This 2019 EV is a first edition trim. That was the only trim available for the early EVs, but it's pretty fully loaded, so it's very similar to the 4 Plus trim of the EV we found a moment ago. This car is a 69 plate, unfortunately, a little newer than the hybrid, but it also has about 4,000 more miles on it, helping to offset the price difference a bit. Those are the closest match in older cars at the moment. To calculate depreciation, I've put in the price of the 2022 cars, subtracted the price of the 2019 cars, and assumed that the motor trade will want a profit of about £2,000 per car. That's the difference between what it is listed at on the website and what we would get for it when we sold it to a trader. So that's why the £2,000 shows in each column. The depreciation turns out to be almost exactly the same, give or take £100. It's actually very slightly higher for the hybrid, as it turns out, but the difference is so small as to not be worth making a big song and dance about. It does seem to dispel the myth though, doesn't it? Most people are going to want to finance these cars. They probably don't have cash lying around to buy them, so let's work out the cost of that finance. Here I've assumed we can get an annual interest rate of 7.4%. There are a few hints of offers a bit lower than that on the internet just at the moment, but not everyone will be eligible for those, so I've gone for a middling to low rate for now. To make things simple, we will assume that we pay off the loan in the time we have the car, 3 years. That makes for very large payments, but it keeps calculations a bit clearer. We can use these figures to calculate the total we pay, and from that subtract the cost of the car to calculate the interest paid. We don't want the cost of the car in this, as we've already dealt with that under depreciation. Next is insurance. I used my details to get quotes for insurance, and I've simply multiplied the annual quotes I got by 3 to get us a total for the time we have the car. The EV is about £150 more expensive than the hybrid in this regard. Now, the exact cost of insurance will of course vary by person, so this is something that you would have to check for your own circumstances. But these are the figures for me, the best I can do. Next up is servicing. I used the Kia website to look up the price of a service plan for each car. This is the cost of a 2-year plan, but it's indicative. Maybe we'll skip the final service before we sell it or something. I've put in costs for road tax, known in the UK as vehicle excise duty, and for MoTs. That's the annual safety test we need here in the UK. Prices would be the same for both cars. Finally, we need a cost for fuel. Here I've used my own cost for the EV. I run my Zoe for 4.1 pence per mile. It's about 2 pence when charging from home, but the little bit of public charging I do effectively doubles it because public charging is so expensive here. The Nero is a pretty efficient EV. Even though it's a bit bigger than my Zoe, it returns the same efficiency. Indeed, slightly better on some runs. So I'm being slightly kind to the hybrid by using my figure here. For the petrol car, I've assumed that we would achieve the WLTP efficiency of 53.3 miles per gallon. Doing that is fairly rare, of course, but let's assume it's possible in the Nero. And I've used the average price of supermarket fuel at the moment, a smidge over £1.30. Using the average UK mileage at the moment of 7,000 miles per year for each of the 3 years of ownership lets us calculate the total cost in fuel in that time. We can now put all of the figures together to calculate the total cost of ownership, and we can see that the petrol hybrid costs about £1,900 more to run than the EV. That's made up of a bit of finance interest. After all, the petrol hybrid was more expensive to buy. The hybrid also suffers slightly higher depreciation, although that's more than offset by the difference in insurance. Servicing the EV is cheaper, but the biggest difference is in the cost of fuel. At the moment, we pay quite a lot of tax on fuel, so the difference is partially that. But bear in mind that the price of petrol is also more variable, something which I've ignored today. Fuel is pretty cheap here at the moment, but it isn't guaranteed to stay so. Fuel prices are very volatile. Bear that in mind when considering the figures. One quick note about maintenance costs. You'll notice that there is no allowance for repairs here. That's because both cars have long warranties, so failures would be covered by them. The only things that aren't covered are consumables, things which are considered fair wear and tear, with the tyres being the most obvious. However, if we are only keeping the car for 3 years and estimating we will drive just 7,000 miles a year, that's the UK average at the moment, remember, then the tyres should last. We will only be covering 21,000 miles in the period of our ownership. If they were in decent nick to begin with, then they shouldn't need replacing. Well, there you go. A real-world example of the difference in cost for running a petrol hybrid against an EV based on buying second-hand. I've done the best I can to cover all of the bases, to be fair in both instances. And the figures tell us that it's about £1,900 cheaper to buy and run an EV than a petrol hybrid over 3 years. In reality, some of the figures might be slightly different in your circumstances, particularly insurance, which is different for everyone, of course. So you should, of course, do your own checks before buying. you might consider keeping the car for longer than 3 years, and that might make a lot of sense. It could well prove cheaper still if you keep it for longer. However, 2019 is the furthest I could go back today to get a real-world figure for the value of both cars. 2019 is the year the EV drivetrain was launched in that car. I wanted to show the current price of cars at 6 years old so as to properly calculate depreciation rather than just wildly speculate about it. Depreciation on the new car market is a slightly more complex beast. In order to calculate it, we need to consider what people are paying for their cars rather than just look at list prices. You may have heard that a lot of EVs are being bought by fleets rather than private buyers, and that is because of salary sacrifice schemes, which offer a tax incentive to get an EV. Buying through that scheme allows people to get into a new car for about 18 to 38% less than they would pay if they leased privately. Therefore, those people are not paying the list price, not by a long way. The fleet gets quite a big discount for buying in large volumes, and the individual pays less because of the tax advantage. Now, that is bound to have some impact on the second-hand market. If you think about it, if you could get a new car for a reduced price, then why would you buy a used car if it cost the same, or perhaps even more? Not everyone has access to salary sacrifice schemes, but a lot of people do. And that has a bearing on the number of people in the market for second-hand cars and the price they are willing to pay. I think the salary sacrifice system goes some way to explaining why we think we see large depreciation. It is somewhat artificially lowering the second-hand market, dropping prices below the amount that would be paid through salary sacrifice. Furthermore, the people who do buy privately are getting discounts, money off the list price, so that manufacturers achieve the targets set by the ZEV mandate. If pretty much nobody is paying list prices, the way people are measuring depreciation against them is a bit off, a bit wonky, so no wonder it can be made to look bad if someone ignores those details. Hopefully this has been a useful exercise, an interesting example of why depreciation isn't the problem that some people think it is, or perhaps hope it to be. As far as I'm concerned, there's no value in suggesting that EVs should be avoided for that reason. I think doubters and deniers might have to come up with another one. But tell me, do you agree? Do you think there is anything I missed today? Is there any way in which these figures are not representative of owning an EV, or owning an ICE car for that matter? Let me know in the comments below. If you've liked this week's video, then it will be a huge help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And I would love to have you as a subscriber of the channel if you want to see more from me. Thanks.